I want to read from a book that I wrote with my best friend and editor of 47 years who died a year ago this April. Was a man named Richard Todd. Just to give you an idea of how dependent I was on him as a writer in almost every other way. The day after he died, I reached for the phone, honestly, intending to call him to ask him how I should deal with his death. But we fashioned this little book called Good Prose, and I'd like just to read from it just because it reminds me of him, partly. Also, this is a little piece about a young man who was part of our family now, who came from an African country called Burundi, who turned out to be an extraordinary writer, I think. And I'll tell you a little more about him when I finish. This is really about him and about memoir. This is the chapter from the chapter in our book about memoirs. The desire to tell the truth haunts the serious memoirist, and so it should. But there is a step beyond truth. For the writer, the ultimate reward of memoir may be to produce a work in which the facts are preserved, but the experience is transformed. In A Fortunate Man, a meditation on the working life of an English country doctor, John Berger writes, "Perhaps this is the true attraction of autobiography. All the events over which you had no control are at last subject to your decision." Writers in all genres are attracted to the promise of control over past events, if by control one means creating form or finding patterns in a life or a mind or the world, and in the case of memoir, finding a road through the wilderness of one's past. Some memories cry out for this kind of control, as in the case of a young man with a painful past who had a powerful story to tell, but was uncertain about whether to tell it. His name is Pacifique Irankunda. He grew up in Burundi, a small African country long beset by civil war. His parents, farmers and herders, were virtually illiterate, and yet they valued education, and Pacifique managed to attend grade school, often in peril from trigger-happy soldiers. He did well. His test scores were among the country's highest and earned him a secondary school education. Then at 19, through a series of improbable accidents and charitable acts, he was brought to the United States, where he spent a year before college at a private secondary school called Deerfield Academy. English was still strange to him when he arrived. He was fluent in French as well as in his native language, Kirundi. He had never read a great novel or a poem, but as a child, he conceived a fondness for the kinds of stories that elders had traditionally told, mixtures of fact and fiction that the elders always claimed were true, with complicated structures leading invariably to a moral. A frequent lesson of the elders' stories was the importance of discretion. Pacifique came from a culture that values silence, and so by training, he was disinclined to tell his new schoolmates much about his past. Moreover, he worried that American students and teachers would be afraid of him if they knew about the violence in which he had grown up. They might think that it had left him violent too. But as he learned more English, he began to set down some of his experiences. When his teacher, I was his teacher, told him that some of what he had written was damn near publishable, Pacifique said he only wanted to improve his English. The very idea of making his stories public seemed to frighten him. He worried that his stories were unfit even for me to read because they contained so much horror. I tried to reassure him, telling him that art had the great power to transform the experience of suffering and injustice into something beautiful. This idea made a strong impression on Pacifique. In one of the stories he wrote, he called it The Color of a Sound. Pacifique begins with a glass breaking in the dining hall at Deerfield. The sound triggers a memory. His native village is being attacked on, this is a quotation, "One of the days my mother apologized to my brother and me for having given birth to us." His family's house is burned down. He and his mother and brother spend the night hiding in the forest. In the morning, standing near a clearing, Pacifique witnesses the killing of a young schoolmate named Patrick. The boy has been tricked into approaching a rebel soldier. The soldier is holding a glass. The soldier drops it on purpose, and the glass shatters. Pacifique explains a superstition in his country that if you drop something you are eating or drinking, you may blame a person near you for wanting it. The soldier accuses Patrick of having wanted his drink, then orders him to pick up the shards of glass and put them in his mouth. The soldier forces Patrick to chew, then shoots him in the forehead. The story ends this way. Because I had seen so many killings and would see ones even more horrifying, I thought I would forget Patrick's. But 11 years later, when I arrived at Deerfield Academy, Patrick returned. In the dining hall, whenever I heard a glass shatter, I did not think of the superstition. I thought of Patrick's mouth full of glass and would see him trying to bite. My mouth would be full of food and I could not take a bite. It was as if the food in my mouth had become the pieces of glass. When my fellow students heard a sound of a glass breaking, they knew someone dropped a glass and they would laugh at that person's clumsiness. When I heard the sound of a glass breaking, I would not laugh. I would see a red color instead, the color of blood in Patrick's mouth, a color no one else could see. During the his first year in America, involuntary memories were an important problem for Pacifique. The dreadful things he could not banish from his mind, gusts of memory that could come at any time. 2 years later, he felt that something important had changed. While writing, he said, he had discovered a partial defense against his memories. That's how it started, he said. I wrote a story and I felt relieved. I could control it. In the head, I could not. It's as if you had your hands on it and you could control it and make it beautiful. So instead of its having power on you, you had power on it. When it comes as a memory, it dictates to you, it controls you. After I wrote that story about the breaking glass, I would hear a glass breaking, but it never came back that way. I mean, I would remember what happened, but it was never as before. I would think of making some modification in the story to make the story better. Then if a memory woke me up, I would get back to sleep by writing it down, thinking I could turn it into something beautifully written. I mean, that's what I wish. He didn't show his stories to other students. He still wasn't eager to make his past public, but he wasn't afraid of that anymore. He was afraid that other students would tell him the stories weren't well made. And because their command of English was superior to his, he would be obliged to believe them. Most writers are vulnerable to criticism. It is hard to imagine one more vulnerable than Pacifique. Writing had been a great discovery for him, a defense against the invasions of memory, a way to get to sleep. But when he wrote stories that included the horrors of his past, he had to believe that the stories were well made or could be remade until they were. Otherwise, memory would regain its hold. If it isn't well written, he said, it's as if it comes back into you. Many writers have spoken about memoir as a way to objectify experience, to get clarifying distance between oneself and one's past. But that was not precisely what Pacifique intended when he spoke of having power over his memories, nor is it the highest use of memoir. One can also use memoir to get closer to the past. The memories that surface suddenly, merely unpleasant for most people, horrifying for Pacifique, are bolts from a bigger storm, capricious, even random. If you can go back to the source and see your memories whole, you can create truer versions of what you remember. You tell the stories as accurately and artfully as your abilities allow. If you succeed, you replace the fragments of memory with something that has its own shape and meaning, a separate thing that has value in itself. The past becomes an assertion that your life is of the present and the future. Taking the undifferentiated materials left by the past and giving them pattern and form can be, more than solace, a source of great pleasure. The delight that memoir can offer is like the delight a woodworker may feel when putting the finishing touches on a beautiful desk. The desk is different from the wood forever, and the good memoir is different from the memories behind it. Not a violation of them, but different, and different, of course, from the actual experience that gave birth both to memory and to memoir. I'll just say, his book will come out next fall with Random House. The title comes from a Burundian saying, which is the tears of men flow inward. I recommend this guy's writing highly, obviously.